The NFC East is home to the reigning NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles, and this team also seems like they got even better this offseason, which might be a scary sight for the rest of the division. However, the Cowboys look to be improved. The Giants were a playoff team last year, and the Commanders, well, they probably don't have to worry about the Commanders. But welcome on into GoldSheet TV. I am your host, Eric Pauly, with my co-host, Dan Alexander, at Newbie Talks on Twitter. Quick reminder, liking the video and subscribing to the channel are the best way to help us grow. All three GoldSheet products, Confidential, Extra, and GoldSheet, are now one product on goldsheet.com. And all the LTS picks and all picks through for baseball and basketball as well will be on WagerTalk.com this upcoming season. Dan, let's get right to it. So, prefacing this preview by saying, Newbie is a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I'm a Washington Commanders fan. I can't speak necessarily for Newbie, but I am a realist as a fan. I am not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I look at what I got. I know my boys inside and out, and I make my decisions. I'm gladly going to fade Washington a hell of a lot this season. I've made my most money over the last two seasons riding with or fading my Commanders, and just try to take like a very holistic approach at it. But going to Philly, they won the NFC, lost in the Super Bowl after having that lead. They lost two coordinators. They got arguably the best player in the entire draft in Jalen Carter, as long as Nolan Smith, who was a great player, made some really great moves this offseason, like acquiring Marcus Mariota to be their backup quarterback, keeping some of that core intact with James Bradbury, Jason Kelsey, Brandon Graham, adding some more explosive players like DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. I'm going to pass it over to you, Newbie. Talk to me, Birds. What are we thinking? Are they, again, the team to beat in this NFC and NFC East and the NFC in general?
Yeah, really, I was playing the long con. I really was just like, yeah, I'll do some preview videos so that we could get to talking about the NFC East. I mean, you mentioned it. I would be remiss if I didn't fully admit that I'm a Birds homer. I got my rally towels ready to go. However, much like you said, for us, it's all about betting with our heads, not our hearts. You know, would I love to come on here and say, you know, hey, get your Eagles season win tickets over, you know, get their Super Bowl tickets down? Sure, I would love to come on and say that. However, I'm not really – it's not that I'm down on this team. Don't get me wrong, but it's always – and we're going to talk about this when we get into the Giants – when you greatly over-exceed expectations – it's so much tougher that next year not to even just meet those expectations, but not fall short of them. So in the case of the Philadelphia Eagles, a lot of pundits and bettors and, you know, detractors of what the Eagles did last season were so pessimistic on what they were able to do because of the ease of their schedule. And I'll be the first to admit, when the Eagles schedule came out last year, I was sitting around the dinner table with my parents and we were all excited because last year's schedule really was cupcake as they come. Now this year, it gets a little bit tougher. You have a lot of teams who are improved. You know, you start out with the Patriots team that who knows what they're going to be. You know, you have a Bucs team who's supposed to be down, but we think about what happened last year with the Seattle Seahawks. They were a team who just lost their quarterback who was supposed to be down as well. And what did they do? They only got better. So it's tough for me to look at this schedule and see over season win totals. It's tough to look at this schedule and say, oh, you know, everything is a lock. However, this team is going to make the playoffs, barring any insane injury. I think your statement that they got better this offseason is a great one. I think Howie Roseman, general manager, operations manager, whatever you want to call him, I call him the cap wizard, because somehow he was able to lock down all of the homegrown players outside of Miles Sanders, bringing back guys on the offensive line like Elaine Johnson, talking Kelsey into having another year under center. These are the things that helped this team go where they were, was having one of the strongest offensive line units. So bringing those kind of guys back while doing the same on the defensive line. Brandon Graham comes back on a, hey, I'm a veteran, but I still want to stay here. I want to retire here kind of deal. You have Fletcher Cox up front, and then you add in the question mark that is Jalen Carter. I was excited when they drafted him. However, if you pay attention to the tea leaves just last week, the whole issue with him and that accident is not going away anytime soon. So that's kind of a dark cloud that may hang over this season. So if they're able to assuage that, or if they're able to move past that, he will, have great impact up front because of who's around him. But I'm just excited, man, that even though they now are basically the Georgia Bulldogs, they at least kept their green jerseys that I know and love so much, and they're bringing back Kelly Green. So they might be the Georgia Bulldogs, but they're not switching the logo. They're not switching to red just yet. But I think finally they stopped outsmarting themselves. They went with top flight SEC talent, which is something that hurt them so many times in the draft. So finally they're starting to look like the roster they should have been, years ago.
So a couple of things that I wanted to point out. For starters, I actually haven't read the Jalen Carter news resurfacing, so definitely something to keep an eye on. If any team currently really has a culture to overcome that, I would put the Eagles on the short list of a team that would be able to move past it. So I'm still optimistic about that. I think your point about the schedule is a really important point as well, because last year they only faced two teams that ended up in the top of DVOA. Only two games, I should say, because they played Dallas twice, but one of them was with Cooper Rush, so not exactly a full assessment there. So the Gonzaga schedule that they faced last year, not going to be facing them this year. But question for you, newbie. So move on from Jonathan Gannon, who a lot of pundits after the Super Bowl, I'm not going to say completely blamed him, but there was clearly a lot to be desired on the defensive side of the ball that he did not reach. So losing Gannon and then hiring Desai, and then also losing offensive coordinator, their offensive coordinator is tough for this team. They decided to hire internally and bring up Brian Johnson, who was in the building already. Steichen went to the Colts. Is there any concern for you on the coaching staff and the lack of continuity? Because every team that loses in the Super Bowl, or not, I shouldn't say every team, but recently there's been a trend of that team vastly underperformed the next season. I was bearish on the Bengals last year for that exact reason. They started slow, but then shut me up. Are you nervous about the change of coordinators and also just the Super Bowl hangover? I mean, obviously they didn't win, but there is a trend that if you make the Super Bowl the year before, you probably aren't going to live up to those expectations again next year. Are those things concerning to you at all?
Yeah, I think there is a slight concern. However, the great thing about trends is that they're no guarantor of what's going to happen in the future. They do have some things that we can extrapolate and learn from. But just because there is the Super Bowl hangover, that isn't something that worries me as much. I think when you have guys who are so instrumental in what happened for a team leaving, you do see those kind of drop offs. And I think you saw that with when the Eagles lost Frank Reich after they won the Super Bowl. Was him and Doug Peterson's collaboration is really what took this team to the next level. The thing for me is I think Jonathan Gannon, him to decide, I think that's kind of, a push right there. I think that Gannon, a lot of people didn't like his bend but break style defense. I think because of how prolific the offense was last season, that's what really put those two together, like having a bend but don't break, allowing your offense to get a break. I wasn't as big of a John Gannon detractor, but I don't think the sky is falling because he leaves. And I think in the case of Shane Steichen, how much of what we've seen with Jalen Hurts is rapid progression, and I just look at him, his year 1 to year 2 leap. And I don't think we've seen a 1 year leap like that out of any quarterback outside of maybe Josh Allen. And I think you're talking about two different situations right there. But how much of his progression had to do with Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, who is now the offensive coordinator. So keeping that steady hand and that collaboration between Jalen Hurts and a guy who he really respects in Brian Johnson, I, again, don't think it's much of a net negative in losing Shane Steichen because at the end of the day, your head coach and what the Eagles have is the guy who's going to be calling your plays anyways. So, yes, I hate that we lose a little bit of that collaboration, but I think they filled those holes nicely. It's the same thing as when I look in the running back room and see you losing Miles Sanders, assuaging that by adding Rashad Penny, adding DeAndre Swift, keeping Boston Scott. I think, yes, there were some holes that opened up this offseason, but again, Howie Roseman and this team did a terrific job of filling those holes rather quickly.
Yeah, completely agreed, especially considering like the money two of the Kaiser White and TJ Edwards got on the open market. Like they were never going to be capped. Javon Hargrave as well, like just an elite player. He was never going to be able to fit into that budget but they did a great job by replenishing some of that talent and also keeping some players along for the ride. Just my last thoughts on the Eagles. So something to note, and I went over the schedule briefly. Their early schedule is relatively easy, but then their mid
Mm-hmm.
stretch is very, very difficult. So, as a futures bettor, if you really do like the Eagles or even other teams, waiting, in my opinion, waiting until about week 5 or 6 might be the better time to get in, because if you are somebody who wants to kind of fade the Eagles, they start off 4-1 or 3-2 with a relatively easy start of the season. You're going to get a better price on Philly. Or conversely, if they do start out 4-1 and you like the Niners or you like another team in the mix, their Philly's price is going to keep dropping, and you're going to get a better price on some other team, because then the Eagles have a very tough stretch where, like we said, like it's
Yeah.
very hard to go from playing, like, really, they played some bad teams last year. Like saying it was a weak schedule is an underrated statement. They really didn't play top tier talent. Not taking anything away from it, but that's just something to keep in consideration. Is they do have an easy schedule, so if you want another team, you might want to wait because that price is going to drop, and that's a good point for you to enter into. And then my last point is if you have an elite offensive and defensive line like they do, like you could probably make an argument they're top 5 in both categories. You're always going to be in it. But last year, they really didn't have to deal with too many major injuries. So if that unfortunately happens, you can't really don't want to play the if game here, but it is a huge part of football. They do have some depth, but just again having to withstand injuries for them or for any team, which they didn't have to really do last year, could be something that comes back to bite them. But Dan, any final thoughts on the Birds, or are you any bets you're looking at to like maybe get in, like for prop or anything, or just waiting to see what goes on? We have a lot of time till the season.
Yeah, I think, you maybe look at some player props. I saw that really mispriced number was AJ Brown over his receiving yards at DraftKings Sportsbook. They had that posted. It was I think in like the low 800s or something like that when the number first popped up. I'm not sure if it's still sitting there. If it is, I mean that's something that I would be hammering with 2 fists for sure. But really, just the final thoughts for me is I think you're spot on. Is getting in on the Eagles before the season starts, if you want to, if that's how you manage your portfolio on futures, sure. But this is really, as far as before the season will go, it's not going to get any lower. You look at their implied probability; they have an 81% chance to make the playoffs. You look at their Super Bowl chances, a 13.3% chance to win the NFC, and a 28.6% chance to win the NFC East. They're above 50%, and I know we'll get into the Cowboys here in just a second. I think they might have something to say about that, but they're a 54.5% chance of doing that. So heading into the season, it's going to be hard finding some value on this team because the implied probability says they're going to be a pretty damn good squad. I would agree with that, but an injury away, a Jalen Hurts being out for an extended stretch away from finding more value in the Super Bowl market or more value, in the playoff market. I wouldn't be buying in on any Eagle stuff unless you can make some case for some nice potential futures. AJ Brown receiving yards would be one of those for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. No need to get into it. Actually, last point is I love the Mariota signing because he could just literally run the same exact offense, just a little bit worse. So it's something I actually called on Twitter. So I'll pat myself on the back. Once he became free agent, I tweeted the Eagles should go get Marcus Mariota. A couple weeks later, they do go and do just that. I thought that was an amazing signing. Moving on to a team, the Dallas Cowboys, who are expected to give the Eagles the biggest run for their money. They lose offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, but they hire Brian Schottenheimer, who has a lot of rapport with head coach Mike McCarthy. Of course, Dan Quinn is the architect of that defense, which was elite by almost every metric last year, advanced and standard. Dak Prescott missed a couple of games last year. And some, no pun intended, threw away some games with some interceptions late down the season that ended up killing the Cowboys season, even though they were looking like they did have a trip to the NFC Championship game on the line and were unable to convert there. Dan, so now we talked all the good about the Eagles. We talked some bad about the Eagles. We're talking some good about the Cowboys. How concerned are you that this Cowboys team is going to dethrone the Eagles this upcoming season? Because from a objective point of view, as just a football fan and somebody breaks the stuff down all day long, I would be pretty nervous if I were you.
Well, and that was my thing even last year. Like I know how the NFC East works. I mean, there hasn't been a repeat NFC East champion since the Philadelphia Eagles were the team who ended up getting that done. And I think that was way back in like 2007, 2008 that they went back to back. So even last season when the Eagles were really in the driver's seat, I said, no, wait on the Cowboys. They have a decently easy schedule. They might be able to sneak in the back door. And if it weren't for the Eagles' huge run that they went on mid-season, with the struggles that they had with Jalen Hurts' injury after that Bears game, you're talking about a different reality for the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Cowboys, talking about what the Eagles did during the offseason, I think they pretty quietly went out and go and get Brandon Cooks, adding to an already pretty stout wide receiving core. They get a Gilmore to help them in the secondary, where they were already pretty stout there as well. So, again, injury is the ultimate equalizer, but I think after the terrible season that Dak Prescott had, the injuries that he struggled with too, I think getting Ezekiel Elliott, out of the situation, I think that only helps Tony Pollard, who all year long, I was saying this guy should be the lead back. I don't know why we're still talking about Ezekiel Elliott, because Tony Pollard brings, you just see more pop with him on the field. Now that he is in the driver's seat, does that change things a little bit? That remains to be seen, but great roster, terrific playmakers on both sides of the ball. Not really any glaring holes for me. Really, it's just Mike McCarthy. I mean, as I was very excited when the Cowboys signed Mike McCarthy. I'm excited every single year when Jerry Jones says we're sticking with Mike McCarthy. That for me is the only knock on this team is the coaching staff. And, I don't think that's changed at all this offseason.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, while it might not be a glaring hole on the roster, a glaring hole in the organization, it's certainly Mike McCarthy. I mean, yes, everyone wants to point to the fact that he has that ring, but the fact that you only won one ring with Aaron Rodgers is actually more of a telling tale how inept at your job you were versus that you were a good NFL head coach. But something really working for the Cowboys is the continuity that they have. Schottenheimer is also just like him and McCarthy have deep roots. So while obviously losing Kellen Moore and his play calling, basically what happened is Jerry Jones said, like, Mike, you're the head of this team. Like, you should be able to figure out how to run this offense. You're this offensive-minded guy. Bring in your buddy to run this so I don't have to pay Kellen Moore all this money to basically do your job over again as well. So that's the one thing that I really think is going to, or if anything is going to hold back. And then again, injuries can't really quantify that, but those are the two things that would really hold it back. Because looking at the Cowboys schedule, probably middle of the pack, like nothing like too crazy, probably about a league average schedule. You look at their depth chart, they added players in Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore, who I'm not as high on Gilmore as it seems like the public really is. I think like now that he doesn't have to be the best corner on the team, that he'll definitely have a good role there, but acting like he's still this lockdown, shutdown, amazing cornerback, I think is a little far-fetched. But yes, an upgrade. Like, all they lost is Noah Brown on offense from their starters. Like, okay, like, see you later, Noah Brown. We got Brandon Cooks instead. So I'm looking at this Dallas team, and I think that in terms of backing them to even win the NFC East or even the NFC in general are really good to look, because pound for pound, the Eagles two best teams in the NFC. I think it's not really a debate there. Do you agree that the pound for pound roster count that the Cowboys honestly probably compare to the Eagles?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great look. I mean, if you're asking me what bet I would make in the NFC East before the season starts, it would be trying to get down a little bit on the Cowboys here to win the division. I just think, again, it's a division that they always beat each other up in. Even when you have bottom feeders in this division, they end up covering spreads. So I don't think there's a de facto runaway, oh, the Eagles, they did it last year, so they'll do it again this year. Even in last year's season, when everything went right for the Eagles, you were still looking at a situation down the stretch where if the Cowboys had a couple breaks go their way, they would have been the division champion. So I'm right there with you. I don't think I'm sitting back, I'm kicking my feet up, but I think that's probably why when we talked with our Eagles part of the preview was I did it with a little bit of bated breath, is because I'm always looking at this Cowboys team. And honestly, with the NFC East, you never know when it could be another team coming from the complete bottom bottom to rise to the top, like the Eagles went from fourth place to win the division last year. So as far as competition level, I think the Cowboys are right on par with the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the only difference is what you see in confidence in the coaching staff. And who knows, if Mike McCarthy's feeling that his seat's a little bit hot, maybe he does turn things around. History says probably not. Seems like he's kind of stuck in his ways. But I'm not writing out the boys. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, because another interesting stat that I saw is when you looked at like Dak, again, like the big killer for him were the interceptions. But according to Pro Football Focus, his 4% turnover worthy play rate was better than 11 other quarterbacks. So there was bad luck involved with that, meaning throws that weren't getting intercepted. Like we'll talk about with Washington, Taylor Heineke, who threw probably 8 interception worthy balls a game and maybe only got one of them picked off, led to Washington winning. A lot of the interceptions that were thrown by Dak were unlucky. And also a lot of the interceptions thrown by Cooper Rush were as well. So just a situation where Dak, there was a lot of talk about, well, now Dak is this turnover-prone quarterback. On a long-term basis, Dak is not a turnover-prone quarterback. It just seems to be some bad luck. And this year really decide that. So, again, if Dak all of a sudden now becomes this gunslinger who is turning the ball over a la Matt Stafford, yeah, it's going to be hard to win. But if Dak's the bad luck in terms of the turnovers regress back to the mean, and he's throwing less turnovers because that's not the quarterback he is, that's just only going to help this team. And then again, Tony Pollard, being that elite player, is also just major for this run offense. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say about the Cowboys because I really do think that they're a great team. I think it's like one of these teams where like we've gone back and forth on certain teams and have like devil's advocate for the Cowboys is they progress, they have a great team, and Dak doesn't turn the ball over, they win games. If not, it's McCarthy kind of blowing games for them. So not to kind of leave too much to be desired on this Cowboys preview. It's just like I think what you see is what you get with Dallas. So yeah. I'm not really reading between the lines too much here.
Agreed.
Look at another playoff team and a team that even won a playoff game last year, the New York Football Giants. This offseason, what do? They do what the Giants do, and they give Daniel Jones a crazy contract that deserved in the sense of, good guy, but no, absolutely not deserved in the sense of the talent. The market is also saying the same exact thing. They're not expecting the Giants to be as good as they were last year. A lot of the metrics point to the fact that the Giants were probably luckier than their schedule was indicated in the first place. Newbie, do you think it's fair to expect regression like the market is from this New York Giants team?
Well, I think it's twofold for me because it goes back to what I said earlier. And it's, when you exceed expectations, you're already put behind the 8 ball from a market perspective, and I think that's probably why maybe the market comes in and they're a little bit more bearish on this team because of how far they exceeded expectations. But the other thing for me is, yes, I know the luck index, but how much of that is more the Brian Dable factor? I mean, this dude, when the Giants signed him as the head coach, that's when I finally said, oh my God, this team did something right. You know what I mean? Like I was always excited because they were always picking the wrong guy. Who was it? Ben McAdoo, who would have his hair slicked back and look like an 80s movie villain. Like I was fine with coaches like that. When they went out and got Dable, I said, yeah, exactly. When they got Dable, it was more, oh, now they just need talent because they have this guy with the steady hand on a roster. I think this is a brilliant head coach. I think he's a terrific motivator. I think he has a great mix of analytics as well as having a steady hand on the game. So the Brian Dable factor, I think, has more to do with the Giants' success last season than maybe some lucky breaks going their way. And then what do the Giants do? They hamstring themselves by signing Daniel Jones to a $25 million contract with how much guaranteed? Like, I don't know what the thought process was on that. I don't know if you slap them with the franchise tag or whatever, but now they have put themselves in a team that was so had a dearth of talent. Now you're paying a quarterback who, as an Eagles fan, I love seeing that deal for him. You're paying a quarterback that kind of exorbitant amount of money when you still have major holes. You look at the wide receiving core. Okay, you paid your quarterback. Who's he throwing the ball to? You know what I mean? You're excited about, you bring in Darren Waller. Is Darren Waller ever going to be the guy that he was in that John Gruden style offense? I guess that remains to be seen. Brian Dable hopes that he will be, but then what you got? Isaiah Hodgins, Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard somehow is still on this roster. So sure, you have your quarterback. You have a running back who seemingly is getting injured every year. He's already ticked off because the front office won't pay him, and he sees the money that Daniel Jones got, and he's saying, where's some of that for me? I'm part of Daniel Jones's success just as much as he is. So I think there's a lot of negative around this team outside of the fact that I still think I have some pretty big talent concerns. Luckily, they've shored up the offensive line a little bit better, but I think the worst enemy of this team is what they end up doing in the front office, and that happened this offseason again.
Fantastic point, because this offseason this front office is really what's hindered them in years past. Like, they just have they're just in love with their players. Like, they draft somebody, they perform decently, and then they pay them. So I, as a Commander fan, I was hoping they paid Saquon and kind of wasted some coin on Saquon Barkley. Obviously, they just have him on the tag now. They were unable to get to a long-term deal. The whole running back market is a conversation we could spend another hour show on. But I agree with your points where you have Dable, very good head coach, Wink Martindale, very good defensive coordinator. Mike Kafka in his first year showed that he could scheme up and get some easy throws going. I think the Waller trade is short-sighted. I think that he's shown that he can't stay healthy, and that while he still has the name to go with it, he does not walk the walk anymore due to some various injuries. And then just this offense, there's just no way that they're going to be able to create enough for him. I guess devil's advocate would be that he is by far the best offensive weapon they have in terms of pass catchers. So if they decide to just make Darren Waller a target funnel every single game, might not be the worst strategy, but will he stay healthy? That doesn't seem like a likely scenario either. I'm bearish on the Giants because while the Brian Dable signing was the best thing they've done in the recent past, and then this is a team that over the course of the last decade has been one of the losingest teams in all of football. So just don't forget how bad the New York Football Giants have really been. That their signing of Daniel Jones shows that while maybe this front office has shown a little bit of maturity, that it's not where it needs to be just quite yet. The schedule is going to be really difficult. Again, the luck factor is something to consider, but like you mentioned, I think that there is something to be said for what Brian Dable has done to not necessarily call it lucky. It's just now you actually have a coach making some of the better calls that ends up helping them. Then you also have situations where the Titans week one, blow a field goal late that would have ended the game for them, and the Giants are able to come back and score and win. You have Washington, who was unable to beat them in 2 tries in a situation where they needed to win to get into the playoffs. So I'm just I think that they're fairly priced. I would love to sit here and just shit on the Giants as much as possible because I hate my Giants fan friends and I love going back and forth with them. But 7.5 seems fair, right? They probably were a 7-win team that got the not say lucky, but they won those close marginal games to go to 9 wins last year. Then they beat the fraud Vikings in the playoffs. But 7, they give me the makings of a 7-win team. So I'm not going to say, I'm betting the under on 7.5 right away because that's the difference between one lucky game, 8 and 7 wins. But am I betting the Giants to do anything of substance this year in terms of making the playoffs or making a run for this division? Count me out on that.
Yeah, and I also think, and this is something that we'll have to look at with the NFC East moving forward, their out-of-division opponents are no walk in the park. So we talked about that in all of our previews, is factoring in who you're going to be playing and what level they're going to be playing at when you're baking in these season win totals. Because it's not just, I could look at this team and see 7 wins. And you also don't do the old go down the schedule and, here's a win, here's a loss. That's just not the nature of the NFL. I run down this. I could see him getting around 7, but just like I'm not rushing to bet that under, I'm not rushing to bet the over because I think that's a well-lined number. If you can find an 8.5, okay, maybe you look towards the under on that. But I think right around that 7 to 8 wins is when I look at this schedule, when I think of how this team, how they stack up against the teams that they face, that's where I land, is right around 8 wins. So I don't think there's anything actionable and something that I'm going to play on that.
As do I. I'm in the same exact camp as you, where 7.5, I think, is just priced perfectly. So, most win totals are priced very well. It's just Vegas.
That's the nature of the NFL betting market. Yeah, that's the NFL betting market for you. You look at the number and you say, that's what I probably would have came at too. That's after the sharps have gotten to it. The value in this market is gone.
Definitely. Maybe attacks some alt markets. We really have a strong feeling on an over or under, but yeah, like the actual numbers, they're going to be sharp almost every single time, if not closer to every single time. Moving on. So my Washington Commanders, we're in a very unique period because we're in a transitory state. The sale of the team has not been 100% locked and loaded, but it's looking like sooner than later that is going to be the case. We go out and we hire Eric Bieniemy to be our offensive coordinator, and basically, realistically, probably Ron Rivera's replacement, right? So Josh Harris is expected to come in, and he's expected to realistically give this team, like, this is like your tryout season. Like, this season for Washington, realistically, should be considered from the get-go like a wash. And I say that upset, like not saying that like proudly. Like I'm sad to say that honestly, because we have such a good defense and we have some really good skill players that we should be on a talent-wise perspective. I don't care what anybody says. We are a top 15 team in football, pound for pound, player for player. Probably closer to 15, don't get me wrong there. But our coaching is terrible and our offensive line is just really also awful. So Ron Rivera is incapable of putting together winning seasons. And the offensive line, which like 2 years ago, PFF rated it as one of the better units in the NFL, I just don't see it. They go out and they sign Nick Gates to be their center, who just is coming back from all these horrific injuries he suffered against Washington and was on the field. He didn't play well. Andrew Wiley, we signed him from Kansas City, who let up some of the most amount of pressure rates last season, like Kansas City Chiefs are allowed him, let him walk for no reason. Then we still have Charles Leno as our left tackle, and we're relying on third-year player Sam Cosmi at guard and second-year players like seventh-round pick or a late-round pick Chris Paul to be our left guard. Like, I don't care who you have under center. Like, you're not going to be able to maximize Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, like great, talented players with that offensive line. All that's really going to come down to, realistically, again, how poorly Ron Rivera is going to coach, and from history tells us he's not going to be a good coach again. But Sam Howell, he has one start in the NFL, and he beat up a Dallas team that clearly didn't care about that game, even though they probably should have, but that's probably indicative of Dallas, laying an egg in that Week 18 matchup, showing that they don't care. But there's just nothing to get excited about for this Washington Commanders team for this season. The only thing to be excited about is that Rivera is going to get fired after this season, and if we're bad enough, we could be looking at a top 5 pick. Newbie, you're not concerned about us whatsoever, right?
I mean, in a word, no. I mean, you're heading into the season. Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, neither of them strike fear into the heart of the opponents. To be fair, the thing is, I will say about the Commanders, and I think you nailed it, is this again isn't a team with any glaring issues. You know what I mean? While sure, you can look at the offensive line, you'd like a little bit more improvement. They do have a strong defense. They do have skill players, which what you need in the NFL. I mean, Terry McLaurin would start and be the number one wide receiver on over a third of the league's rosters. He would complement anybody and what he's able to do. It's just, how do you get the ball downfield to him? You look at a running back room who adds Chris Rodriguez to Antonio Gibson, and Jonathan Williams and Brian Robinson Jr. Like this is a team who, again, they have depth at different positions as well. So they injury-proof themselves. So I just don't understand why this team isn't better. And I think a lot of it just has to do with what's going on behind the scenes with the sale of the team, with Dan Snyder, with all of that. There is a major cloud that just hangs over this team that really just makes it tough for them to get over the hump. And I feel bad because I feel like Ron Rivera got put into a very tough situation. You look at what he was able to do in his first couple of seasons. I think he's a terrific head coach, but I just feel like he is so behind the 8 ball on what he's able to do because of what's happening with this front office. It's crazy because you look at the NFC East and you look at the Giants, you look at the Commanders, and it really is two arguably of the worst and most dysfunctional front office situations, and both of them somehow are in the same exact division. So that's what worries me, this team, more than anything. I think they, like when we talked about the Raiders, this is a team that probably because of that perception around them, they're going to be getting some points in a lot of games. And I think they're going to cover a lot of games because of that defense. It's just what happens. Can Sam Howell be decent enough to not hurt him? If so, does Jacoby Brissett come in and he's able to, at least keep somewhat of a competitive nature on the offensive side of the ball? Because defensively, they're going to stifle people. They're going to force people into bad situations. But when the ball is on the 20 for the offense because of a turnover the defense just forced, can they punch it in the end zone? I think that's going to be the big issue for this team, and that's going to be the big question mark for me.
Yeah, so what I'm saying to sum up Ron Rivera is he's a fantastic leader of men. Players love him. They play hard for him. They respect him. He's just a terrible head coach in terms of X's and O's. Fair. And putting together, in his history, he has a couple of winning seasons, and the only outlier is the Super Bowl run that they made with Cam Newton. But as we saw in that Super Bowl game, that team was never as good as that Denver Broncos team. It was just 15 wins kind of just came all on the back of Cam Newton. Back to the luck in terms of turnover worthy plays. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I can tell you from the eye test. Taylor Heineke was lucky that so many of his passes were not intercepted throughout the course of games last season that Washington should have. That ended up being 5-3 in one-score games. But if any of those passes went the other way, it could have easily been 3-5. We just have the makings of a 6-win team, and it's unfortunate to say because we're going to waste another year of an elite defense. In terms of EPA consistency last year, Washington 8th in the NFL, 59% of defensive efficiency, achieved over opponent's average in the percent of games. So that is a defense that is legit on the likes of Dallas, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Denver, Washington right there. In terms of offensive one-score game pass rates, when we need to get and move the ball forward and try to win a football game, second to last in the NFL, behind only in front of the Atlanta Falcons, who had no interest of trying to, throw the football whatsoever. Washington, they made it clear, their front office, they've spoken a bunch of times. They have no interest in trying to throw the football. Maybe Eric Bieniemy comes in and somehow convinces them that, this league, you need to throw the football and pass the ball to be successful. But they're just playing he's playing. Ron Rivera has his team playing it's 2001, and unfortunately, it's not. It's 2023. Throwing the football has proven to be a lot more effective. Grounding and pounding and rushing and all that. Yes, it could do some good things, when we beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football, do the ground and pound. But outside of that, it's just not a recipe for success. So, in my opinion, the best thing for this franchise would be, and you can't tank because players are never going to tank, but losing more often than not, finishing with 3, 4, 5 wins and being able to look at, ideally, a Caleb Williams who's from the DMV area, a Drake May if he shows that he's actually that good at UNC. Being bad for Washington this year is one of the best years to be able to be bad. So I would gladly, as a fan, take Washington to be bad, and then their win total at 6.5. If that was 7, I'd be just all over that under. If that was 7.5, I would have bet it already. I don't know if it opened there. It's going to be sad to see because I'm going to go to a couple games this year. I'm going to be sitting there probably holding a ticket for the other team to win the game, and I'm just going to watch that unfold in front of me, like I have done, like I did twice last year. I went to the Eagles game in DC and the Giants game when they needed to win, and they tied. I was holding Giants and Eagles tickets at both of those games. So
smart man,
It makes me sad to say, but it's just the best thing though is for them to lose and be a bad football team. But I want to thank everybody.
And I also. No, and I also just last point on that. Just last point on that is you brought up Eric Bieniemy, and I think you're looking at him as a guy who you want him to do very well, because I think if you're a Commanders fan, he's the head coach in waiting. So, you don't want to completely fracture any relationship, but I think Eric Bieniemy is probably looking at hey, I definitely want to do a good job. I want to come in. I want to put a stamp on my team. But if we end up not winning games at the end of those games, is that going to be the worst possible thing? That I don't know if that's exactly how he's going to be looking at it. But as far as an outside perspective, I think that's the situation. That's part of why they brought Eric Bieniemy in, is because he is going to be the successor to Ron Rivera. And if he's able to have a position where he can get his guy at quarterback, this is a team that we'll be talking about having a quick turnaround, quite like the Giants in coming seasons, in my opinion.
Yeah, and once the head coach is officially, the new owner is officially signed, sealed, and delivered, once sportsbooks start offering those like unique markets, like first head coach to be fired, I'm sure there'll be
Yeah,
value on Ron Rivera there to be fired
good
from the
point.
season. Went a little long for this one solely because Dan and I are just in love with our two teams. We had to get our full thoughts out there. As you can't tell, we're just, in terms of the Eagles, we're both neutral, where we could see the cases for over and under. With the Commanders, I can see the cases for both sides, but the reality of the situation is they're going to go under. But thank you guys all for tuning in. We'll be back on Thursday going over the NFC North, one of the most interesting divisions that I have some great thoughts on. So some actionable info will be there. Again, you can find Newbie on Twitter at Newbie Talks, myself at Slime Action and at GoldSheet. Give the video a like, hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you guys next time.